There are 3 videos America Uncovered has made regarding the subject of plant-based diets and veganism, or animal-based products, depending on how you want to phrase it. They made one video about the environment, one video about plant-based meats, which I've already responded to, and one video if animal-based meats are good for you. So today we're going to be talking about the environment, and we're going to be responding to this specific video.
Fires rage in the Amazon rainforest. Some of them were set by ranchers. So is meat to blame? And what impact is meat really having on our environment? This is America Uncovered. I'm Chris Chappell. The Amazon is burning. And who's to blame for these fires? According to CNN, it's people who eat too much meat. Steve. Not just according to CNN, actually. In recent years, that's become a common headline in the media. According to the Yale School of Forestry, cattle ranching is the largest driver of deforestation in every Amazon country, accounting for 80% of current deforestation rates.
Regarding the 2 accusations that are made, I think at the end of this video, most people will be able to figure out if CNN is right, even if I don't give my particular opinion, even if I just give all the facts of who is responsible for deforestation in the Amazon, as well the world. So I'm first going to talk about everything regarding land usage, and then we'll talk about the environment, addressing what has been said so far in the video. So when it comes to land usage and addressing what's been said so far, there was a review in 2007, published in 2008 in ResearchGate, that they estimate cattle occupies 84% of total area around agriculture and livestock usage, and have experienced a 9% year, I think that means year, on average over the last 10 years, causing 70 to 80% of deforestation. So even though a lot of news headlines might say 80%, realistically the figure is between 70 and 80%. So I care more about the truth than perhaps maybe inflating the narrative of how drastic animal agriculture damages the environment. If we look at our world data, and it was either published and or updated in 2021, cutting down forests, what are the drivers of deforestation? In it, 95% of all deforestation happens within the tropics. So pretty much what happens in the tropics is the vast majority of deforestation in the world. So if you go to the headline, if you want to read this in our world data, beef, soy, and palm oil are responsible for 60% of tropical deforestation. It talks about the effect of cattle ranching in Brazil and outside of Brazil. So I'm going to read this for y'all right here. Beef stands out immediately. The expansion of pasture lands to raise cattle was responsible for 41% of tropical deforestation. That's 2.3 million hectares every year, about half the size of the Netherlands. Most of this converted land came from Brazil. Its expansion of beef production accounts for 1/4, 24% of tropical deforestation. This also means that most 72% deforestation in Brazil is driven by cattle ranching. Cattle in other parts of Latin America, such as Argentina, however the fuck you say that nation, also accounted for a large amount of deforestation. 11% of the total most deforestation for beef therefore occurs in Latin America, with another 4% happening in Africa. And if you look here, you can see that beef is the single biggest cause for tropical deforestation in the entire world. Deforestation for the Amazon rainforest in Brazil ranges between 70 to 80%. But for the sake of argument, we'll just go with 72%. I think that's less redundant. So moving forward, let's see what Chris Chappell has to say. Let's see how he justifies eating animal-based products.
And Brazil, which contains 60% of the Amazon, is the world's largest exporter of beef. Cattle ranchers in the Brazilian Amazon are aggressively expanding their herds and willing to clear-cut the forest and burn what's left to make way for pastures. As headlines would suggest, this is why people who eat meat are ultimately responsible for the Amazon fires. And if the Amazon burns, we all do.
Often called the lungs of the earth, the rainforest supplies 20% of the world's oxygen. If it burns to a point of no return, environmentalists warn it could turn into a dry savanna and begin emitting carbon instead, plunging the planet ever deeper into a climate change crisis.
Now I would like to address the environmental claims that have been made so far. This paper that was published in 2021, it claims that half of Brazil's carbon emissions have been caused from deforestation and the loss of 2,000 species. And yes, from what we understand from satellites, it absorbs 5% of global emissions and emits 20% of the world's oxygen. This one meta-analysis that was published back in November 2015, looking at the impact of rainfall in the Amazon rainforest and how it impacts the world. Based on deforestation rates prior to 2004, it was estimated that 47% of the Brazilian Amazon would be deforested by 2050. And this can change from policymaker to policymaker, leader to leader. And when it comes down to it, the Amazon rainforest plays a key role in rainfall within the Amazon and outside the Amazon. Looking at this paper back in 2013, approximately 40% of the Brazilian Amazon was under some form of protection. Now this can change around the years, and protections can be weaker or they could be stronger, depending on legal interpretations and if there's loopholes. So protections might not always really be that strong, legally speaking. It could always be a type of media ploy. And there's something called savannahization. It is a transition between this a forest or some sort of other type of environment into a savanna. Now, when it comes down to it all, the scientists estimate that there is a tipping point in savannahization from a forest to a savanna when deforestation exceeds 70% of an area. Back in 2013, this paper argued that at least 90% of the Amazon should be protected and 40% of the Sardu, or however you say it. It's the savanna part of the Amazon rainforest. The Amazon rainforest is not just a regional asset for the environment, it is an international asset for the environment. And cattle ranching is the main driver for deforestation within the Amazon rainforest and in general.
But it's not just the Amazon. According to the United Nations, every bite of burger boosts harmful greenhouse gases. According to this study in the journal Science, meat, aquaculture, eggs, and dairy use approximately 83% of the world's farmland.
I like to fact check what Chris Chappell has to say. Now, as far as each burger boosting greenhouse gas emissions, well, obviously raising an animal is going to require more time, pollution than plant-based meats. Plant-based meats creates less greenhouse gas emissions, requires less water, and requires less land and energy. But we can get more into greenhouse gas emissions later on in this video. Now, as far as the article, Reducing Food's Environmental Impact Through Producers and Consumers, the full study or article, it's kind of behind a paywall. Well, if I go over to Our World Data, if you look at this chart right here, it's around 80%. 77% of agricultural land is used for animal agriculture, which is crops and animals, and only creates around 18% of the world's caloric supply. Around 80% of the world's land for animal agriculture creates around 20% of the world's caloric supply. Around 20% of the world's land for crop-based agriculture creates 83% of the world's caloric food supply. So yeah, I would agree with around 83%. I think it's around 80% of the world's land is used for animal agriculture if we include crops.
And those animals are eating up food that could be used to feed people. It cites this report, WWF, Appetite for Destruction. Oh, sorry, I misread that. It's called WWF, Appetite for Destruction. I always forget it stands for the World Wildlife Fund now. Stupid panda. Anyway, the report says the more animal products we eat, the more feed we need to produce. So then it predicts the impact on climate change. Huge reductions in meat eating are essential to avoid dangerous climate change, according to the most comprehensive analysis yet of the food system's impact on the environment. In Western countries, beef consumption needs to fall by 90% and be replaced by 5 times more beans and pulses.
Judging by how Chris Chappell brought up reports, not from the actual report, but from actual authorities, news articles, I highly doubt he read the actual report from Appetite for Destruction. He kept bringing up The Guardian and articles that referenced it. Now, one or two possibilities are happening here. It's either Chris Chappell and America Uncovered read through Appetite for Destruction, or one of their people did, and they're being deliberately misleading when they bring up soy later on, or they actually just never read through Appetite for Destruction and they're trying to actually have an understanding of something that is very complex, the environmental ecosystem, by just quick summaries, which has a lot of issues if you don't understand claims that are made, and contradicting claims and how to compare claims. If anyone noticed on the screen when America Uncovered was showing the Guardian article, before showing the cover up for Appetite for Destruction, WWF report finds 60% of global biodiversity loss is down to meat plant-based diets, which puts huge strain on Earth's resources, claim from The Guardian. This claim from The Guardian. America Uncovered put this on the screen. I wonder if y'all can remember that. I could not find the 60% claim in Appetite for Destruction, so I searched around the web and found this claim in a blog from WWF. Report reveals struggling extent of human impact on the planet. Populations of mammals, birds, fish, reptiles, and amphibians have on average declined in size by 60% in just over 40 years, the biggest driver of current biodiversity loss over overexploitation and agriculture, both linked to continual increased human consumption. The blog linked the WWF Living Planet Report 2018. This led me to Living Planet Report 2018 from WWF. FYI, I did not read the whole thing because America Uncovered should have, but is not responding to it. The index that WWF uses, and later I'll mention Our World Data, they use the Living Planet Index. And through this series, responding to America Uncovered, you'll understand the importance of biodiversity. But if I was to short and summarize it right now, it's pretty much good for everything that we extract from the earth, whether that's air or crops and food. The latest index shows an overall decline of 60% in population size between 1970 and 2014. Species population decline are especially pronounced in the tropics, with South and Central America suffering the most dramatic decline and 89% loss compared to 1970. Freshwater species numbers have also declined dramatically, with freshwater index showing an 83% decline since 1970. And that's 83% globally. Overexploitation and agriculture activity driven by runaway consumption are still the dominant cause of current species loss. In the Living Report 2018, it talks about runaway consumption. The ability of ecosystems to renew themselves is called biocapacity. So biocapacity is often used in a negative connotation because we're usually harming the environment. Biocapacity has increased about 27% in the past 50 years, but has not kept pace with human consumption. Humanity's ecological footprint has increased about 190% over the same time period. I'll be showing you a graph of runaway consumption in a second, but here's a legend. Here are the things we'll be measuring, and here's the graph. Does this maybe put into perspective how quickly and just how much humanity is consuming? The Guardian is right about the issue that animal agriculture, aka meat, is responsible for a lot of this problem. It's responsible for a lot of the land for animal agriculture, almost 80%. So yeah, it's responsible for a large portion of biodiversity loss. However, I think the Guardian might be over-exaggerating a little. That is a problem and dishonest. I wanted to call that out. Animal agriculture is one of the major factors in the decline, but is not the only reason for the decline of species loss. More than one source was used to make the Guardian article, and Chris Chappell and America Uncovered team forgot to mention that, or did not have the time for it. However, America Uncovered put that 60% statistic on the screen. Am I the only curious person in the room here? Would it have killed America Uncovered team to fact check these articles a little bit rather than looking for a debunk, which you will see later on? So let's move on. Our Living Planet in 2022 and Our World Data have new numbers for the biodiversity loss and population decline of animals, and both of them are using the same numbers from the Living Planet Index in comparison to Our Living Planet's 2018 report. So let's take a look at it right now. Since 1970 then, the size of animal population for which data is available have declined by 69% on average. The decline from the population is much larger. For some, it's much smaller. And in fact, many populations have been increasing in size. WWF report, in 2018, animal populations decline was 60%. Now it's, in 2020, 69%. Between the two reports from WWF, there's a difference of 9% of population decline of animals. I wanted to include this in to really help you understand how biodiversity can affect human beings. And I'm going to use bees as an example. This one systematic review, Do Managed Bees Have Negative Effects on Wild Bees? A systematic review of the literature. This systematic review had 146 different studies that fit the inclusion of their criteria. So as you can imagine, it's pretty robust. So if I could short and summarize, managed bees has some issues with how it can affect wild bees, and this study wanted to take a look at that because humanity uses managed bees to help pollinate crops for agriculture. But the thing is this also can affect wild bees that also pollinate crops as well as the natural ecosystem. This study wanted to look at 3 different ways this can affect wild bees. competition for resources, how this affects plants within an ecosystem. And then number 3, transmission of pathogens. Pathogens just mean diseases or parasites. So out of these 3 things, of the study examining competition, 53% reported negative effects on wild bees, while 26% reported no effects, and 19% reported mixed effects. So there's a diversity of effects here. And when it comes to plants, 36% of plants had a positive effect and negative effect, and the rest being mixed. In other words, commercial managed bees for honey products and pollination for crops for humans create just as much help to the overall plants in an ecosystem as they do damage, meaning managed bees are not ideal pollinators for the Earth's ecosystem. And when it came to pathogens, managed bees actually gave pathogens or potential negative effects of pathogens to wild bees by 70%. Results vary depending on whether managed bees were in native or non-native range. Managed bees within their native range had lesser competitive effect, but potential greater effects on wild bees via pathogen transmissions. For anyone interested, I would highly recommend going over the introduction to the systematic review. It brings up that there's over 20 different thousand species of bees, and it brings up a few different major causes that can actually harm the species of bees: habitat loss and fragmentation, pesticides, and disease. And one of these big problems that can also affect it is, once again, managed bees. Wild bees are super important in order to sustain ecosystems and the health of the plants within those ecosystems. On the subject of habitat loss, keep in mind the largest cause of deforestation is cattle and animal agriculture. But just thinking about the amount of land we use, and in a hypothetical, if everyone went vegan today, not only would we stop deforestation for cattle and animal agriculture, but we could actually increase the amount of land that we're using for crop agriculture by about 20%, and we could increase the world's caloric supply up to around 140% of what it is now, only using 40% of the world's agricultural land we're currently using. And the 60% of the remaining land that we have, we can convert back into wild land and natural land, so forests, crops, and we could actually help support wild biodiversity, such as bees. We're going to look over another review real quick titled The Conservation and Restoration of Wild Bees. Here's some things I want to go over. Non-honeybees are equally effective or better pollinators than honeybees for many crops. When it comes to honeybees and managed bees, they've been used to help pollinate crops worldwide. And they've been declining in the United States over the past 50 years, which has essentially risen to the question if relying on a single type of bee, particularly managed bees, are actually a good idea to begin with, and foreshadow many problems within the future. Intensive agriculture during the 20th century and even to this day is considered to be one of the major factors and one of the major causes of bee population decline. And current hypotheses for the declines in bee populations include pathogens from commercial bees. One of the many reasons for this hypothesis is that commercial farmed bees actually has a higher rate of pathogens in comparison to wild bees, aka more diseases, more parasites in commercial bees. The bumblebees, the genus Bombus, are the best studied taxon, the only taxon that has been globally assessed for its endangerment status. Yeah, in short, we could definitely use more data on bee population decline and the potential causes. Threats to conservation, bee habit loss, invasive species, potential climate change, and consider the main causes of species loss for a taxon other than bees. So let's not buy honey and support managed bees that are killing off wild bees that have more importance to the world's ecosystem, as well as people can go vegan to actually help bring back the habitats for these wild bees. But more importantly, biodiversity loss does harm human beings, especially when it comes to any resource that we might value from the earth, such as food and crops. Looking at biodiversity loss on the land and fresh waters raises a question: what is biodiversity loss in the ocean like? And can we learn a little bit about the damages happening to the ocean quickly? Why don't we check that out? So keep in mind, it's hard to actually get an accurate reading for the ocean's biodiversity loss, judging by a lot of the ocean is, well, unexplored. I don't know what it means by since passing a maximum in 1994. I can only assume that means a high amount. But basically, global fishing efforts, cumulative yields across all species and large marine ecosystems had declined by 13% since passing a maximum in 1994, or 10.6 million metric tons. Consistent with our results from estuaries and coastal seas, so when they refer to estuaries, they're referring to where the ocean meets a river. So just think of where land meets the ocean, those areas. We observed that these collapses of large marine ecosystem fisheries occurred at high rates in species-poor ecosystems as compared with species-rich ones. When they mean collapse, they're referring to an over 90% loss in animal wildlife or biodiversity. So this came from a paper back in 2006 and reviewing 44 protected marine reserves for large-scale fishery closures. They found that the reserves and fishery closures showed increased species diversity of target and non-target species, averaging a 23% increase in species richness. So protecting these areas from fishermen can actually help bring back the wildlife. Biodiversity in the ocean is decreasing. So why is biodiversity in the ocean decreasing? If we look at the future of fisheries, it had a few interesting things to say on this subject. The paper talked about how most fishery scientists are employed by agencies to create quotas, and in a perfect world, everything should be profitable, and this should help contribute to employment and through international trade and global security. But in reality, overfishing is a problem, and fishing lobbies want to try and get rid of any troublesome regulation that can actually stop them from fishing. I think the writers of this paper is trying to make a very clear point that fishery scientists, governments, and businesses, scientists, none of them are exempt from potentially being lobbied. Trying to make a marketing idea to the populace that fishing is sustainable is a business and is a part of the business of the fishing industry. One of the things that the fishing industry has done to try and give an alternative to fishing inside of oceans is to farm fish. So to create fish that they're not going to have to fish out of the ocean and they won't have to destroy the ocean. But one of the problems for this is they quite often end up feeding these fish other fish from the ocean, which is the equivalent of robbing Peter to pay Paul. I really like that nice little joke they put in there. However, farming fish doesn't destroy sea life the same way a net does, but it does create excess amounts of bacteria and fecal matter that does pollute and destroy the ocean, just in a different way. A food report back in 2003 estimated that 1/3 of all fish that are caught are either turned into fish oil or fish feed. The fishing industry doesn't exactly deny this. They admit that they'll be feeding farmed fish, wild caught fish. However, they do claim they'll be trying to switch over to lab-grown meat and insects. Insects, isn't that wonderful? Lots of more sentient beings will die to create the same caloric need. Global fishery landings are declining. So fishing landings is the amount of tons or the amount of fish that is landed on a port, foreign or domestic, by about 500 metric tons per year, from a peak of 80 to 85 million tons in the late 1980s, because overfishing and habit degradation are likely to continue. The future of fishery also brings up that bycatch is around 30% of global landings. And keep in mind, bycatch is quite often thrown back into the ocean. The WWF did a study, and what they found was 40.4% of all marine catches are bycatch. So bycatch is anything that you do not mean to catch, which is either thrown back into the ocean or discarded. Generally speaking, it's what you don't mean to catch, so it might be useless. And about 30% of all the bycatch is in global landings, aka what's found in ports. This paper also talks about how Bennick, aka the bottom of the ocean, is also quite often end up being fished, which is like the equivalent of burning down an entire forestry. But with the fishing industry, it's like using a net as a fast-paced fire and completely destroying everything in its wake. So the people that created the future of fishing, what they argued for was a 20 to 30% reduction in fishing. By the way, we're talking globally here. And a focus on smaller prey rather than larger prey. And they actually said in their own paper, this scenario describes what might happen, not will come to pass. That must be depressing to look at all the statistics and to realize how everything is going to turn out. From the California Academia of Sciences, will there be fish in 2050? So Villy, one of the people who worked on the paper, The Future of Fisheries, that we went over, when he was being asked if there will be fish by 2050, this was his response. Of the University of British Columbia, UBC said, yes, there will be fish left, but it will be very different from the ocean, from the ones your parents and grandparents knew, and very different from now. The biggest difference, large predator fish will be gone. There will be small fish left, but not necessarily the ones we eat. We went over an expert opinion, which isn't terrible, but it wasn't exactly the evidence itself. I just thought it was interesting to hear his opinion. On that note, Villy's predictions are not unfounded. Published in the scientific journal Nature, Half a Century of Global Declines in Ocean Sharks and Rays is the title. Overfishing is the primary cause of marine defamination, and I'm probably saying that wrong, but basically means the removal of top predators and herbivores in the ecosystem. We've found that since 1970, the global abundance of oceanic sharks and rays has declined by 71%, owing to an 18-fold increase in relative fishing pressures. Fish are sentient. They feel pain and pleasure just like you and me. Now, they're nowhere near our level of consciousness, and I'm not arguing that. But how many of these fish die and suffer because of humans? So EMW is estimated means weight. Extrapolating EMW data to estimate fish numbers for species without an EMW gave a total estimate of 0.97 to 2.74 trillion fish that die each year. That's kind of a large number of fish dying. So let's look at this in perspective of tons, because the numbers we're getting are estimates from the tons. Global capture of fish food jumped from 44 million tons in 1973 to 65 million tons in 1997. By the late 80s, however, the stocks fished by many wild fish fishing operations were fully exploited and even overly exploited. Since then, despite increases in investments and fishing capacity, fish productions from wild fisheries has slowed or stagnated. And this was a food report back in 2003, so it's a bit outdated. So why don't we take a look at something a bit more up to date? So I kind of want you to get an idea that innovations, even though they've been increasing for wild captured fish, it's still difficult to capture more fish because of overexploitation. And even with that being said, since the 90s, we've been relatively stagnant around 93 million fish. So that could either be for a few reasons. Innovation increases or the amount we're fishing. Basically, for captured wild fish, it's not getting easier, as you can see with the red line on this chart. And as you can see for the blue line, which is aquaculture, so it's basically farmed fish, they're not caught in the wild, it's been increasing. But keep in mind, aquaculture is quite often factory farmed fish. It's usually fish living in their own ship pens, as you've already seen. So yeah, we're getting more fish from mucho poopies, living in their own poop. But at the same time, we're still destroying the ocean drastically. If there's a take home from this chart and reading 2003's report as well as this, is that the Earth's water doesn't really have a whole lot more seafood to give us than already what it currently has. In short, we're overexploiting the Earth's waters. Fishing and pollution kills a lot more marine life than what's recorded in tons of what's caught. Large nets for catching fish in the waters can break free and become ghost nets, and they're designed to kill, and they can kill lots of marine life. Now, in Canada, there was actually a big move to try and push and ban plastic straws and single-use plastics, where Bloomberg estimated 0.03% of plastic in the oceans are straws. Now, I'm not sure if their math was correct, but it was reported by multiple scientific journals. So if I had to guess, I'd say there might be some credibility to that. And I struggled to find other estimates for the amount of straws in the ocean. It is what it is. The Great Garbage Patch in the Pacific Ocean, 46% of all the plastics is from fishing nets. So how do we expand that to the world? How many fishing nets are out there in the world's ocean? Well, 20% of the world's ocean's plastics is fishing nets. The rest, approximately 80%, is from rivers in Asia. Most of the plastic pollution from Asia comes from 10 Pacific rivers. Which is no surprise. Asia is the world's most populous region, home to 60% of world pollution. Now, with all that being said, couldn't you say hashtag marine life problems, not my problems? Well, you could, but 50 to 85% of all oxygen is created in the ocean, meaning land mammals like us use oxygen essentially from the ocean through a process of carbon fertilization. Just like the forests do carbon fertilization, and they sink carbon back into the earth and create breathable air through photosynthesis, so do phytoplanktons that are little plants in the ocean. We're mainly talking about phytoplanktons here, but other plants create photosynthesis and carbon fertilization in the ocean as well. And they rely on whales to poop and fertilize them with iron. Now here's the thing, we could either kill off these phytoplanktons with chemicals or physically damaging the environment that they live in, or what we could also do is kill off the whales and the food that the whales eat. Because if it wasn't for the food that they eat, they might not have as much iron to shit out. When it comes down to it, we're killing lots of whales through bycatch and ghost nets. And here's the thing, if you swallowed a large plastic net, maybe you'd go Super Saiyan and go to the bathroom and poop it out. Maybe you defy the odds and you'd go Ultra Instinct and poop out a plastic net that no other life in the Omniverse could poop out. But the reality is, when a lot of these whales swallow these nets, they're not going to go Ultra Instinct, they're going to die. And through looking at NASA satellites, we can actually see globally, dilaton phytoplanktons are decreasing. More than 1% a year from 1998 to 2012. How many years can we lose more than 1% until we're out of oxygen? Meaning that we are damaging the ocean and we're possibly harming our ability to breathe air. At the end of the day, greenhouse gas emissions that we release in some ways is minute in comparison to carbon fertilization and protecting the carbon fertilization and the photosynthesis that happens on planet Earth. Because carbon sinks and carbon fertilization help reverse global warming to healthy levels. So why don't we compare maps of overconsumption and biodiversity, what we know about the ocean, all together now. The biodiversity loss map is from the Living Planet Report 2022, and the overconsumption is from 2018 Living Planet Report. Looking at biodiversity loss is pointless unless you also consider overconsumption. So if we look at our Living Planets Report 2018 map of overconsumption, this puts into perspective how biodiversity loss is affected through trade internationally and consumption. So I want you to look at the loss of biodiversity map right here. Now I'm going to show you overconsumption. And here's the thing, when it comes to the amount of fish dying in the ocean and marine life, it's mainly because of overfishing and overexploitation. And when it comes down to it, fishing yields have been going down. So keeping all this in mind, it's pretty easy to understand that the third world plays a big role in international trade, while the first world tends to overconsume. Okay everyone, I'm not perfect, I'm not amazing. And before we leave the biodiversity loss subject, I just wanted to say, when I saw the 60% biodiversity loss title on the Guardian article, I just became curious and I started reading. And then I asked myself another question, what is biodiversity loss like in the ocean? I haven't read too much about that from Our World Data and WWF. And here's the thing, if Chris Chappell had that same level of curiosity, he would have been asking questions. And if he was asking himself more questions, he would have realized, at least reducitarians, vegans, they at least have an argument that there's definitely a reason for people to actually eat plant-based for the environment. And this is just it. They don't have that curiosity. They lack the curiosity to get this job done right. This is why I'm not just responding, but I'm also fact-checking Chris Chappell and America Uncovered. Okay, everybody, this brings us to the video summary. So we're going to go over 4 points and what we can do to actually help solve these 4 points. Number 1, cattle is the leading cause of deforestation worldwide as well as in the Amazon. Number 2, the Amazon is important to the world's ecosystem because of the fresh air and rain it supplies to the world. 3, biodiversity loss, aka loss of animal life, is mostly driven by consumption and animal agriculture. This could reduce the world's oxygen supply, worsen global warming, reduce human food, and this would cause, all of the following would cause lots of suffering. Number 4, overconsumption is generally driven by the wealthiest nations and generally happens in less developed nations. So for all the following, especially 1 and 2, the best behavior to normalize is to go vegan. However, for 3 and 4, we need to think a little bit more. We can reduce consumption, waste, and buying used products, especially local stores that only accept donations for goods to be sold, because those stores would help with reducing market demand. The reality is, even without greenhouse gas emissions, biodiversity loss alone is a huge reason for people to consider going plant-based for the environment, or even to consider going vegan for the environment. So with that being said, have an amazing 24 hours.
So